What you just heard was a live take of this crazy end riff from my new single, On the Brink of Madness. And I want to talk about how I'm playing this riff, but also what I was thinking when I was composing this. This is the kind of riff that I don't write very often. A really over-the-top, almost clickbaity sort of riff that you hear on Instagram, that kind of thing. And usually these sorts of riffs, to me, feel like they're out of place in songs, right? Kind of just written to be explorations of technique or show off how good you are. And there is an element of that in this riff for sure. But also I wanted to put this riff in the context of the song and have it make sense. So I put it in a spot where I think it made sense within the song, that the song was really building towards this kind of crazy part. But I'm also contrasting this riff with simpler riffs after it, as well as the big sort of melodic sections before it. So let's take a look at this riff. I'll talk about how I'm playing it and some of the technical things that are going on, but also talk about some of the motivic ideas that I'm using within this, some of the ways it's connecting to the rest of the song, and all of that good stuff. So let's get into it. This riff is all in 4/4, and it's mostly using the E minor blues scale. If you watch my lesson I put out last week on Dementing the blues scale, I talk about some of the theory I'm using and the notes I'm focusing on when it comes to the blues scale to write these kinds of riffs. And this isn't the most common scale to do this kind of riffing with, but it works really well in this particular case. One of the main things I'm focusing on in this riff is open strings. So the opening part, all kinds of open strings, right? And there's a couple of reasons why I like the open strings. One is a technical thing. There's a lot of parts in this riff where I'm jumping from really high to low parts on the fretboard. So I'll be all the way up here, even with like a tap note. And so the open strings are giving me a chance to get my hands repositioned. So if I have to bring my right hand back from tapping to where I'm palm muting, or vice versa, my left hand needs to come from a really high fret all the way to a low fret, the one open string just gives me a little bit of enough time to get from low to high, right? If I'm doing like... So that way I can play this riff smoothly and be able to do it in one take, which is what I did at the beginning of this video. And actually when I recorded it, I did this mostly in one take. There was some comping here and there. But a lot of times when you hear riffs like this where it's jumping from low to high, if it sounds completely seamless, it's usually because probably the guitarist has punched it in. And I've actually done that myself. So I'll play like the low part of a crazy riff and then punch in the high part separately and then comp them together. For recording purposes, that sounds awesome. It sounds super clean. But for the case of this particular riff, I wanted to be able to play it live. Now, the really tricky thing with the open strings from a technical perspective is that you need to stop them from ringing once you're done. So on this lick, for example, so I'm going from that open B string down to the low E string. So once I hit that low E string, it's up to my left hand to stop that B string from ringing. So not only do I have to fret this note, but I have to stop sort of that move. So there's a lot of muting involved with this. I couldn't use a hairband on this riff. There's too many open strings, obviously. So it's up to my left and my right hand to control those open strings when they're happening, which is easier said than done, especially when there's a lot of tapping and moving around. So that's one of the trickiest parts of this particular riff. If you're trying to learn it, really focus on keeping those open strings from ringing when you're moving from one section to the next. The other reason I really like the open strings is it provides me with big interval jumps. So at the beginning, we have a jump of an octave right there, and another octave, and a jump of a major seventh. These really big intervals that sound cool, and they'd be basically impossible to play any other way. But with the open strings, it's nice and smooth. It's easy for my left and right hand. It's definitely tricky, but it makes it possible to do. And then I can write these riffs that sound absolutely insane. So we have other big jumps in this riff too, like jumps from the low E string to the high E string. Really crazy riffs that would be, once again, impossible to do without the open strings, but the open strings make it work really well. From a composition perspective, there's a couple of things I'm doing. One is to connect this riff to parts of the song that happened earlier. The very beginning of the song starts like this. So we have this move from the flat 5 to the 5 and back to the flat 5. And I catch that in riffs earlier in the song, but I also catch that in this particular riff. In fact, it starts, once I do that first measure, with this, which is that flat 5 to 5 and back. Once again, flat 5 to 5 there. And then this part here on the low end, I'm going 5, flat 5, and then later, well, first I go major 7, but later I do flat 5, flat 5, 6. And that is actually hinting at a riff that's going to happen right after this riff, where I'm going, that becomes a main part of this final breakdown riff that happens after the crazy riff I'm talking about right now. And so I'm using that part of this crazy riff to hint at the riff that's going to happen later. So I'm touching on things that have already happened by doing some of these flat 5 to 5 moves and some of these quicker blues ideas. And I'm also hinting at a riff that's going to happen later by doing this low part. So I'm trying to connect this crazy riff to the rest of the song so it doesn't feel too out of place. So these are all things I'm thinking about as I'm writing and as I'm playing these riffs. So I'm going to play this entire riff slowly. You can see how it's put together. I'm going to play this second time through because there's an extra measure that happens at the end. It looks like this. It's kind of a continuation of that opening riff. Once again, really tricky to play, lots of tracking happening, but the open strings are really helping on that particular riff. So here's the entire thing slowly. And here's my live take of this riff again, this time with the tab on screen. One last thing I want to talk about with this riff, and it's more from a compositional perspective. So after this crazy riff, we go into this lower, heavier riff. And this is using some of those melodic ideas from the heavier riff as well as things that happened earlier. You have that flat 5 to 5. Also do the 4 to flat 5. That happens at the beginning of the song. That kind of thing. But I'm using this idea, but down lower in a heavier function. I also do that 5, flat 5, 6 idea there as well. So you have this big riff that goes all over the place. It's completely over the top. And then right afterwards, it's into this heavy slam you in the face riff. And for me, it's all about that contrast. This heavier riff makes the faster riff feel faster, and the faster riff makes this heavier riff feel heavier. And that kind of happens with the melodic sections too. So before this big crazy riff, you have a big melodic section where things are epic and they're building and it gets to this tension point, and then that releases with the crazy heavy riff, and those melodic ideas make this crazy riff sound crazier. And in retrospect, the crazy riff makes the epic part sound even more epic. And then when this heavy part kicks in, it sounds even heavier because we've done all this noodly stuff before it. So when I'm writing crazy riffs, I am thinking about how they're fitting within the context of the whole song. It's not just about how a riff sounds on its own, because riffs can sound really cool on their own, but then not fit within the context of a song at all. You hear it all the time. I feel like that's something that happens a lot with Instagram guitarists, for example, where it's like, here's this incredible riff, but then you listen to a full song and that riff is in the middle of it, and it's kind of like, either it doesn't have the impact or it just doesn't fit, right? It's like, okay, you had this cool riff and you just kind of slammed it into a song. So if I'm writing a crazy riff, I really want it to fit within a song. And there's a reason I didn't put this riff in until the very end of the song. You know, I could have started a song with a crazy riff like this and it would have been really over the top, but then there's no context for it. There's no understanding of where this is fitting in, right? There's no purpose for that particular riff. Whereas when I put it at the end of the song here, after the big melodic section, this riff is sort of the release of that tension that happens in the melodic section before it. And it's also a way to build towards this big, heavy ending. So the riff serves a purpose within the entire song, besides just being cool on its own. Hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can write riffs like this and how you can put them into your songs and have them make sense. If you enjoyed this riff, go check out the entire song. I have a full playthrough video of On the Brink of Madness that's on my channel now, and you can find the song on all streaming services as well as my Bandcamp. I also have tabs available. That is all in this video's description if you want to check that out, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, stay proggy.